In this topic, we shall discuss cooperation in Africa formed by African independent states. We shall discuss the Organization of African Union, OAU, African Union, AU, and East African Community, EAC. We shall look at their formation, structures, achievements, and challenges facing them. The formation of the OAU has got its background in the ashes of the collapsed Pan-African movement. On the 25th May 1963, about 30 African head of states who were already independent at that time decided to replace the Pan-African movement with a more effective and rigid organization, which they called the Organization of African Union, OAU. OAU had several objectives at the time of its formation. These were decolonization of African countries, international cooperation within independent African countries, promote better living standards of the African people, to have a united voice in African matters at UNO's meeting, eradication of racism and apartheid, especially in South Africa, creating a forum where African heads of state could meet occasionally to discuss African matters, and non-interference in internal affairs of the member states. The OAU Charter outlines the structure of the organization by establishing 5 main organs. OAU was made up of 5 organs. The General Assembly. This was the supreme organ of the organization. It was made up of all the heads of the member states. The main function of the organ was to make policies to guide the future of the African countries. Council of Ministers. This council was made up of foreign ministers of the member states. They met twice every year. The main function of the council was implementation of decisions by the General Assembly. Council of Ministers. Secretariat. The Secretariat was headed by a Secretary General who is elected for a reasonable 4-year term by the General Assembly. The Arbitration Committee. This was the organ that resolves disputes between the member states peacefully, for example on boundaries, refugees, etc. This was made up of 21 members picked from different member states to serve a 5-year term. Liberation Committee. This was a committee that was concerned with organizing and supporting liberation movement in the African continent. This was done away with when all African states acquired their independence. OAU had several achievements. Some of them were, it actively supported liberation movements such as in Mozambique, Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. Although the organization had several successes, it also encountered a number of challenges. They include OAU membership was voluntary, so some member states withdrew their membership, for example, Morocco in 1989. OAU lacked its own army for peacekeeping operations. It depended on armies from the member states. Boundary disputes between member states ended into open war which embarrassed OAU, for example, Ethiopia-Eritrea conflicts. Financial problems facing the OAU were chronic. For example, budget could not even effectively pay salaries of the Secretariat. African states had different forms of government and ideologies. OAU members belonged to other regional or international organizations, for example, Commonwealth, UNO, NAM, etc., and hence lack of commitment. Interference by superpowers in African affairs, especially during the Cold War era. African Union, AU, was established on 19th July 2002 at Durban in South Africa. This was when the presidents of African states resolved to replace the 38-year-old OAU with a more effective body called the African Union. Mr. Amara AC of Ivory Coast was brought on board to replace Dr. Ahmed Salim of Tanzania to become the first Secretary General of the new AU. Although AU evolved from the OAU, this new organization differs from the predecessor in the following ways. AU challenges the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of the member countries, especially when there are cases of violation of human rights. AU envisages a union of African people with even a united parliament throughout Africa, unlike OAU, which was an organization of African heads of states. AU has accountability and mechanisms to review and checks economic progress within the different African countries once in a while. AU intends to establish peace and security councils with a joint African army to maintain peace and security throughout the African continent. AU proposes to establish a peace and security council with law enforcement powers through the creation of a standing African military. The structure of the OAU was slightly different from that of the AU in that, while OAU had 5 organs, the AU had 9. The African Union consists of the following organs. What are some of the challenges facing the African Union? Some dictators in Africa are not yet ready to give up power through democratic means. In Africa, there are 2 kingdoms where democracy is still out of the question, that is, Swaziland and Morocco. Ethnic, religious, and racial differences in some parts of Africa are too extreme to be changed overnight. For example, Sudan, Nigeria, and Rwanda. Loyalty to former colonial masters has split Africa into Francophone and Anglophone countries. Boundary disputes between member states always embarrass the African Union, and lack of adequate financial resources remains one of the major challenges in the operation of the Union. In this lesson, we shall discuss the reasons for the formation, organization, challenges, and the rebirth of East African Community. What is the East African Community and when was it established? The East African Community was an economic and social cooperation between Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. It was established after the presidents of the 3 countries signed a treaty in 1967. Several reasons led to the formation of East African Community. They include promote and provide free trade of goods produced within East Africa, provide common services in areas such as railway and harbors, facilitate free movement of people within the region, establish similar custom tariffs and duties to the non-member states, enhance and strengthen closer ties and understanding between member states, enhance self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and full independence from the rest of the world. The Treaty of 1967 established East African Community organs to coordinate the activities and direction of the organization as follows. East African Authority. This was the community's supreme organ which comprised of the heads of the 3 states. The East African Legislature Assembly. It was charged with the role of making laws to govern the services offered by the community. The Secretariat. Headed by the Secretary General and based at Arusha, Tanzania, it coordinated the work of the councils that ran the community. The Common Market Tribunal. The tribunal was to settle trade disputes between member states. The Court of Appeal. It was to hear appeals from the courts in the 3 member states. East African Corporations. These were established to offer services to the 3 member states. On 15th January 2001, the new East African Community was launched in Arusha, Tanzania. The objectives of the new East African Community included to develop policies that will foster closer political cooperation among member states, to establish a custom union, common market, monetary union, and, if possible, political federation, to provide economic development within East African region, to develop adequate and reliable energy supply in the region, to develop social sector issues such as culture and sports, and to develop areas of common economic interest such as Lake Victoria.